Hi, everyone, and welcome to the JMCO channel. I am here with Mike Sibley. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. It's a little rainy here in South Florida, but it's fun. It's nice.
We don't have that issue here, although we could probably use some rain with all the fires and fire threats going on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we have a big episode today. I'm just going to ask you a few rapid fire questions and you can give us some of your advice. The first question is, after years of disruption from global instability to freight volatility, are manufacturers finally stabilizing, or is this just the new normal?
Well, I think to some degree there is some stabilization when you talk about being able to predict a little bit better getting your materials, getting things. But now we're in this weird structural volatility stage of geopolitics, and you got the tariffs and now fuel, you got this war, and how's that going to play in things. So it's like you start seeing this positive and then something happens, and it's like we're constantly in this up and down. So I hope this isn't a new normal, but it seems like dealing with supply chain stabilization is becoming, even more important than ever because of all these disruptions that keep happening.
Right, absolutely. When you look at today's environment, what's fundamentally changed and how supply chains need to be managed?
Well, I think the decision model, kind of like what we were, building off of that last question, the decision model has gotten more complicated because when you start talking, we've talked about landed costs in the past and other things, but now you've got to deal with tariff costs and resilience of getting your supply chain and where is it coming from, and is it going to get here? Is it going to get stuck somewhere? So that's another just factor that you're building into this. And I think really the better, companies that are managing it better are looking beyond their tier one suppliers or their major suppliers and saying, okay, where else do I need to go? What supporting sources do I need to have? And so you've really got to look at your supply chain and evaluate it and say, okay, how do I de-risk myself?
What's the biggest mistake you see still some manufacturers making when they try to future-proof their supply chain?
Yeah, future proofing can mean a lot of different things. To some, it's like, well, let's just buy a whole bunch of, materials and stockpile everything, which can, depending on your industry and what kind of materials, you can put yourself at a big risk. You've got, just carrying costs and things like that. But I think really future proofing is looking at supplier visibility. And I think collaboration with suppliers, better planning data, better forecasting, and really trying to think about how your supply chain, how you work with your supply chain, and how that feeds into your forecast and where you're going as a company. I think that's how you start better future proofing your business.
Yeah, and inventory strategy has completely shifted. How should manufacturers be thinking about balance between just in time and just in case today?
Yeah, it's probably somewhat of a hybrid model there. Just in time and just in case. And I think really you've got to look at suppliers, lead times, how many suppliers do you have for that particular thing that you need, and really balance that out against your critical materials, the things that if you are struggling to get those, or it takes a long time to get those kind of materials, you have to be a little bit more edgy on the just in case versus the just in time. And again, how do you collaborate with those suppliers to maybe even give them visibility and insight into your forecast? Are you sharing your forecast with them? And that helps them to understand and give them insight so they can plan better. And I think that's when you start talking about supply chain, that's kind of the whole idea of a supply chain, is you're connecting those links up and down the supplier base so you can better manage your own business.
Right. Where do you see companies getting it wrong when it comes to inventory, holding too much versus not enough? You kind of just answered that, but tell us more.
Yeah, I think you can. If you jump into it a little bit more, holding too much, you see obsolescence issues, cash issues. And let's think about this. Inventory is cash sitting on a shelf somewhere, right? And when we talk about carrying costs are 20 to 30%, right? So you've got this, and sometimes you even hear people say, well, I'm going to order a whole bunch and I'm going to get a big discount. And that's fine. I've seen it happen, but how long is it going to take you to use it? Are you going to be borrowing on a line of credit? Do you have the working capital to support that? Do you have the forecast to even support that? And if you don't, do you end up throwing that away and that whole discount goes away? So there's a big planning process that I think goes in. It doesn't need to be necessarily overcomplicated, but you really have, if you can set up a simple way to do this, you can plan better to try to get this right.
Right. A lot of leaders know they need better data and visibility, but don't know where to start. What actually moves the needle without overcomplicating things?
Yeah, I think some really simple dashboards can start the process. I think one, it starts with having good, accurate information. So, having inventory quantities on hand that you actually know are correct. So there's cycle counting opportunities, periodic visit. Make sure your system that says here's what we have is accurate as a starting point. And then from there, you can build on dashboards that include things like supplier performance, forecast accuracy, lead times. And so you can build it out in a real few simple metrics, and then over time expand it so you don't overcomplicate the situation.
Right. For mid-sized manufacturers especially, how do you improve supply chain visibility without overspending on technology?
Well, I mean, it start with whatever ERP system you might have. So, it's a lot of, I see a lot of companies that have ERPs. And in fact, I even see some that use things like QuickBooks and an inventory software, but they're not using the technology within the ERP system as best as they can. Maybe it wasn't set up right, or maybe they just haven't put the discipline and accountability into following the process. And if you can start there with simple things like the dashboard we just talked about. So I'm a big fan of budgeting and putting a budget together, and try to budget and forecast even at the product level. And some companies say, well, it's really hard to predict. Okay, use statistical analysis, and with AI and with Excel and all these tools now, you can apply some statistical models to try to help you better plan that out. And then when you do that in a combination with the ERP system, you can really build in. And in fact, James Moore, we've built supply chain dashboards for companies. We have a supply chain dashboard that we use and that can implement. What it does is it actually helps take your forecast, your raw materials, your lead times, and plan out your purchasing patterns. So that way you can better predict cash flows. And I think on top of that, speaking of cash flows, use a 13-week model. Look at your working capital, manage your working capital.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had to simplify it, what's one supply chain move manufacturers should prioritize right now to build real resilience?
So, I think, when you talk about that, I think it starts with the supplier collaboration, the visibility, forecasting. So I would go back and I would do a risk assessment and say, okay, what are my most critical components, and make sure I have the supplier collaboration there first and foremost. Build the visibility with them, and then build your forecasting. Do those kind of things. But if I was going to do anything, I'd risk assess it. I would look at it and say, okay, what is my top components? Where do I have that risk? And I actually see this all the time where companies run out of materials and they get stuck, or we're going to have to delay this, or we're going to have to delay that. And it's like, how did this happen? Well, we lost sight of our quantities, or we thought we had more than we did, and the suppliers backed up, and so they're not able to meet what we thought would be typical lead times.
Right. So that was kind of the bulk of today's episode, but there is a really trending question going around right now, and I would love your comments and whatever you could give us.
Sure.
So we're seeing companies potentially receive large tariff refunds. How should manufacturers think about using that kind of one-time cash strategically, especially in today's uncertain environment? I have seen every single news source cover this, and I think we need to hear it from you. So
yeah. So one of the things, I would not treat it as I treat it as non-recurring cash, not as something that's recurring. So first, don't just put it in and say, okay, this is going to pay our operating costs. because it's not going to continue to happen. So watch out for that. I think so. Then from there you say, okay, well, what do you do with it? In some cases, there may be some refunds that you have to send to your customers. Some companies have to pass that through. So other good sources or uses might be debt reduction, or maybe even some CapEx, so automation upgrades, things like that. It's this one-time source. I know there are some companies who are struggling with margins and things like that because tariffs are continuing right now, and who knows how long. I know it's potential who knows what happens in July and August when this current set goes away, but it seems like they're around. So, continue to plan for that. That means you've got to really can look at your pricing, look at your costs. But when these refunds do come, and I don't know how long it's going to take for all these companies to get these refunds. I keep hearing different things, but I would treat it as an opportunity to maybe invest in the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was so great talking to you today, Mike, and thanks for all of your wisdom. We are going to do another episode in May, so everyone stay tuned. And then you're speaking in Tampa at a conference. We have some posts on that going on LinkedIn, and so everyone keep a lookout for that too. All right, Mike. Well, I appreciate everything, and it was good talking to you today.
All right, you too. Thanks, Faith.
Thanks.